Okay, I'm just going to present my findings from the research task that the Year 9s did for the War Scrapbook. And basically I've looked at the different areas of the task in terms of how they responded to the different research techniques they used and then in regards to inquiry learning. So these are my results and recommendations as a result of the data that I've come to from the questionnaires that they've written. So the task was that I needed to select a group that were doing an information learning activity. And basically what it means by an information learning activity is they had to be doing some form of research that required them to do independent research on a topic. So it had to be an independent aspect to that. The activity is ideally designed and taught and critically analysed by me, but as I'm working in the school context, I picked an activity that has already been designed and just tailored it to the task. And throughout the task, I collected data through 3 questionnaires that the students completed. They completed one of the questionnaires at the start of the task, and it was quite good because we'd done a unit on discovery and looking at Captain Cook. So they'd actually been through the research process in the unit before. So they had all those things fresh in their mind about how they felt about their research skills. So we did that at the start of the unit. We did a questionnaire, and then in the middle when they were in the thick of their research, and then we did the 3rd questionnaire at the end when they'd finished their research and were about to synthesise all their work in their assessment. So here we've got a profile of the student group, so that you've got an idea of the students that I was working with. I worked with the Year 9 SOS class that I teach, but I worked in the role as a teacher as well as a teacher librarian, teaching them their research skills that they needed to get through the task. It's important that you know also that this is a low-level literacy group and it's a smaller class for that reason. And so the data that comes from this, you've got to keep in mind that there's students who are in Year 9 but do have a lower level of literacy than most students that age. The ILA was the research component of the War Scrapbook task that they're undertaking. So basically I've picked the time where they're researching for the scrapbook, and what they've done is gone and constructed a War Scrapbook afterwards, after this component. I'm using a sample group of 10 students. Basically I've decided to use this sample group of 10 students because during the task 2 students left the class. There were 20 students in the class. And because of the high absenteeism of some students, they didn't complete all 3 questionnaires. So I decided just to take the sample group of the 10 students who completed all of the data. This is a cross-section of students from the lowest students in the class up to the more able students in the class. As you can see from the graph up the top as well, there's a high proportion of male students in this class, so that's something to factor in when you're looking at the data also. So from the 10 students, there were 2 female and there were 8 male students. In a second, I'm going to show you some data, and basically I have had to categorise the data into either fact, explanation or conclusion. So students were asked to make statements about what they knew about World War I. And for what they answered, I basically had to categorise that as fact, explanation or conclusion. A fact is if they could just recite a basic fact about World War I. An explanation was if they could say this happened because of something else, so they could sort of see the cause and effect relation. And the conclusion came about if they could then draw a conclusion from this, like this was a tragic time in the history of Australia because. So they needed to be actually committing those higher order thinking strategies to those skills. So you'll see that some of the graphs refer to things as fact, explanation or conclusion, and basically they're using higher order thinking even more as they work up through those 3. So this is the first part of the data. This is questionnaire 1, so keeping in mind this is before they started the task. I asked them to take some time to think about their topic, which was World War I, the Anzacs and the Gallipoli campaign, which is what we're focusing on. Now write down what you know about it. As you can see, I've got the A to J, the 10 students that we were looking at. And of those 10 students, only 3 students, B, C and F, were actually able to write down a fact that they knew about World War I. So two students wrote down one fact, and one student was able to recall 2 facts. So you can see they're starting with quite a low content knowledge before we started the task. The 4th question was, when they researched, what do they find easy to do? And a lot of them, 3 of the respondents wrote using the internet, and 3 wrote gathering information from videos. So they were the popular things that at the beginning of the task students thought that they found easiest to do. You can see 2 students said here that they find nothing easy to do. So some of the students had a bit of a resistance to researching. The next one was, when you're doing a research task, what do you find difficult to do? And 5 out of the 10 respondents wrote find the right information. So you can see that clearly that's something that they find difficult to do. Reading through websites, so with a low-level literacy group, comprehension, you only expect that that's going to happen, and understanding content also came up. So then when I was teaching the students inquiry skills and research skills, to start off, I let them view a documentary about World War I, because with that data, I could see that they were quite visual learners. They liked learning from videos. So we watched a documentary so that they had a basic understanding of what the task was, what the content was that they were going to have to research. Then I got each student to come up with 5 questions to frame their research. So I said, okay, you know this about World War I now, what do you need to learn? What are 5 things you're interested in? So some focused on weapons, some focused on medicines and those sorts of things. So they had to pick what they were interested in there. And that's an important part of the inquiry process, that they're actually choosing the questions for themselves, so they're agents of their own learning. Then I taught students some explicit searching strategies, and then they researched independently, obviously with the guidance of teachers and teacher aides because of the level of the groups. They then put the information they found into their own words on Word documents. So this is the process we then went through after that data. So then this is in the middle after they've gone through that process and they've done the independent research. This was the data I then collected. So from the original data with only 4 facts, you can see that they were able to recall quite a lot more. They didn't have any of their notes with them when they filled out the questionnaire. This was just from recall. So you can see that we've got students who are recalling facts. 4 students were able to recall facts. We've got 4 students who are able to give explanations. This happened because, and 1 student was actually able to make a conclusion from that. So you can see through the process they were able to use those higher order thinking skills in their research. Then this is in the middle. This is looking at what they found easy to do now that they've gone through part of the process. Still videos came up. Some of them found using the search strategies I taught them easy, and some of them then said that finding information was easy. We've still got 1 person who found nothing easy. Once again, relating back to that first data, still finding good information was the thing that they found the most difficult to do. Finding a clear answer for websites, searching. So that's the aspect that they really find difficulty with, is that process of searching and gathering really clear answers to their task. I really like this data. They have to write down what they find, how they feel about their research so far. So at this stage, we've got 3 of them felt completely overwhelmed, 40% of them, so 4 of them felt frustrated, and 3 of them felt confident. So in the middle there, we've only got 3 people who are confident with what they're doing. But that is actually a natural part of the information search process, that in the middle they're feeling that angst about whether they'll get everything done and whether they can draw it all together. So that's quite usual for them. So then we continued on, and students visited the library to find books on their research and pictures and sources. And they were given the opportunity to extend their research if they felt they hadn't done enough in some areas. And students falling behind were guided by the teacher and the teacher aides. So we just refined the search process. With the way that I taught the unit, we started mainly working with computers and with laptops, and then we took a trip down to the library and got some books together and came back and worked from books mainly in the second part of this task. So some interesting data came from that process, which I'll go into in a second. You can see here that at the end, in terms of facts. They were able to recall, a lot of students were able to recall more facts about the information, and there were 2 students who were able to recall conclusions. One actually could do 2. So that higher order thinking was moving up for a couple of students, but keeping in mind that they are a low-level group, they were probably limited by their abilities. But still, when you see in contrast to the first questionnaire, they had learned quite a bit. This was the data that I found really interesting in terms of progression throughout the task, because here they were asked the question, again, thinking back on their research, what did they find easiest to do? And 3 out of the 10 students said using books for research. Now, at the start of the assessment task, there weren't any students that mentioned books, and in the middle there weren't any students that mentioned books. But after I took them down to the library and they were able to hire some out, that was something that came back, like that's the most popular response then, that they found using books easier. Once again, that same comment of searching for information was the thing that was most difficult for them, and that they found it difficult to search through those large amounts of information. And to me, I guess that made me feel that using books is better for students of that ability, because it's condensed. Once they find the right book, the information is really condensed within that book, whereas to a lot of these students, they go on the internet and it's just so overwhelming for them. There's so much information and they have to use so many different strategies. But that being said, there were a lot of students who achieved success on the internet also. Now, their feelings about their research, in contrast to the 6 or 7 students who were feeling unhappy about it, you can see here that 60% were confident about their research, 10% were happy, 20% were confused, and 10% were unhappy. So in contrast, having only three students who were not feeling particularly well about it, there are the majority of students that after they'd completed their research task, they were quite happy with what they'd achieved. And this is just a comparison of the facts, explanations and conclusions, that you can see that it was actually in the middle of the task when they were able to recall the most facts and explanations and conclusions, and were obviously the most engaged. I found this data interesting also. During all 3 questionnaires, they were asked how much they feel they know about the topic, and they were also asked how interested they were in the topic. Now, their interest started at 2.5 and tapered off across the process. So that showed that they were most interested in learning about World War I when they started it, and they gradually got a bit over it towards the end. Still quite high, but it did taper off. Whereas their knowledge, they started off perceiving that they didn't know a particularly large amount about World War I, and that then peaked in the middle of the task. So these are the findings and recommendations that I've made as a result of this data. Students began the activity with very limited knowledge of World War I. I'm sure they have learned about World War I before, but they obviously haven't retained a large amount of information about it. During and after the activity, some students were able to make explanations and conclusions demonstrating high order thinking, so they were able to develop that over the time. Interest in the task started high and diminished over the course of the activity, and students perceived that they knew the most about it during the second questionnaire. These are the recommendations that I have made after doing this research, that we take some time to review researching strategies before students start a task. I was really surprised when I went through how to use Google with the students and said, these are how we use our Boolean operators and, but, and or, this is how we find information. When I saw how they searched without that, their search strategies were really limited. And I think that just made me realise that I probably don't explicitly teach that enough, and that they need to constantly have that reinforced to them. That we also need to capitalise on the first few weeks of learning, because that's when their interest is the highest. And also to help students, to get students to formulate their own research questions. I found that really engaged them, because some students were interested in propaganda, whereas other students were more interested in weapons, or some students were more interested in training. So that really enabled them to have that individual ownership over the task, and I found that was quite effective. And also promoting the use of not only the internet, but also books and videos. I know Janice has sent some emails around about different libraries that are talking about getting rid of books and going entirely to the internet and e-books and that sort of thing. I think this was real proof.
Mr. Phil, could you contact main reception, please? Mr. Phil, or one of the groundsmen, contact main reception, please.
I think this was proof that that students do respond really well to using books, and that you need to use lots of different variety of things, not just the internet. They really liked using videos, they really liked using books and the internet. So I think that while the internet is a great source, there's also lots of other stuff out there that we shouldn't neglect. I also said that more time spent with students on what is and isn't a credible source, because I was surprised that even though students seemed to know that Wikipedia wasn't a credible source, they'd say, what about ask.com? Is that credible? Can I use that? And that whole process of what is credible and what makes a source credible, they really need to spend time on that. Also, in my studies, I've learned about using a guided inquiry team, which basically means bringing in experts, another teacher who might specially know a lot about the topic, the teacher librarian who can help them with research skills. And if I had my time again, I would probably try and utilise the skills of other people in the classroom. Also, so they're just not constantly hearing from the same person all the time. So that's a recommendation also. So that's the end of my presentation. They're all the results and findings that I have. Did anyone have any questions about anything that I spoke about during the presentation? Or further clarification needed about anything?
Did they do the same assessment piece as the other students in the other classes? Or was it specially modified for this low level class?
They did the same task in that they had to use the same task sheet and everything, but I just specifically told them that they had to work with the Anzacs and Gallipoli, because I think that there's more information on that, and I could find a lot when I did a couple of searches on all the different tasks. Other students from other classes were able to choose from 10, 12 different topics. I just only limited them in saying that they had to do the Anzacs and Gallipoli. And the other reason for that was I wanted them to be able to make it their own, but I also wanted to make sure that I knew, and like could focus in on the one topic, so that the teacher aides and I could help them in a more tailored way, because they were specifically working on that. So that was really the only modification that was made, that they had to pick that topic. Yeah.
So some of them did like using the internet, but
Yeah.
some of them did like using the books too.
Yeah, they responded so well to using the books, and really in terms of getting them organised logistically to go down to the library, we started off with the internet early on, and a few students were feeling quite swamped with that, and they were really struggling, particularly the lower level kids, because there's so much reading and there's so many processes they have to go through. But then when we actually took them down to the library and they went through the books and they found some books they were interested in, they got so much information really quickly, and they responded so well to that. So, and in their data that came up straight away, that using books was good. But
could it also be the layout of the information too? So
yeah.
I find even on the internet it's very blocky, as opposed to books. There's pictures, smaller text.
The way they're like aesthetically, to look at them, and it's all contained within. But for Year 9 students, like I know we've spoken before about how with junior students they prefer the books. I wasn't expecting that to come from that data, that they really liked using the books. But that I noticed, particularly with the lower kids in the class, they would say, oh, can we go back and use the books now? They actually wanted to use the books more after they were introduced.
It's not cool to be using books, but when they can see that it is actually the easier, direct way for most kids. And it's less distracting, I find, the books.
It focuses them in. But so that was an interesting finding, I think. That's about all. Okay, thank you very much, guys.
Very good, Lisa. Well, that's interesting.